You're listening to Crossroads France, a podcast from Agence France Presse. In this series of 5 podcasts, we're looking at how France is dealing with a 21st century identity crisis. As it heads into the hurly-burly of the 2022 presidential election, France is a country in flux. The old stereotypes about French life are morphing into a new reality. I'm Barney Spender. Bienvenue. In episode 1, we looked at the forgotten people of the empty diagonal in the Ardennes. In episode 2, we head south to look at the changing landscape of French industry. Once upon a time, not so long ago, France was a major industrial power. In some areas, it still is. But as with many other European countries, such as the United Kingdom, its heavy industry has dwindled. France is no longer a leader in the field of metallurgy, car manufacturing, and even textiles. Those days have gone. In the last 40 years, many of its factories have closed down and moved away to North Africa, Asia, or Eastern Europe. The number of people employed in industry today is a half of what it was then. After 2 years of pandemic, and with the war in Ukraine raising the red flags of sovereignty and self-sufficiency, there's genuine concern about this deindustrial revolution. Crossroads France, Episode 2, Reinventing Industry. The département of Aveyron is one of the prettiest in France, with 10 towns listed among the most beautiful in the country.
Oui, j'ai mes phares allumés.
Viviers lies almost midway between Clermont-Ferrand to the north and Toulouse to the south. It was, or is, depending on your point of view, home to the Société Aveyronnaise Metallurgy, otherwise known as SAM, which until recently was a major supplier to the car manufacturer Renault. Today, however, the entrance is blocked by blue containers stacked on top of each other and covered with banners protesting against the imminent closure of the factory. The workers have gone further, occupying the factory. Among them, union official David Gistau, who's worked at SAM for 31 years.
There it is, 7:30 p.m. There are still around 20 people left, and then around 20 people will arrive at night. We spend moments of sharing and solidarity.
The 350 or so employees of the factory were laid off in December 2021, and a good number of them take turns to occupy the site.
For 87 days, we decided to take the means of production under our protection, since Renault made the decision to stop working with the company, which led to the Commercial Court of Toulouse announcing our closure.
SAM's existence lay predominantly in supplying Renault. But when the car manufacturer called time on its contract, SAM's fate was sealed. The workers who were laid off cried foul, suggesting that Renault was switching its supplier to Eastern Europe. AFP contacted Renault for a comment, but as yet, there's been no response. The former employees are occupying their factory and even keep the furnaces burning in the hope that the state or the region may smooth the path for a possible buyer. Christelle Rimbaud gives us the tour.
This is what we call the new foundry, the workshop that has the largest machines in the factory.
In front of us, a furnace about 10 metres high, filled with molten aluminium. Keeping the ovens full and burning is what allows former workers to occupy the factory. Emptying them can take several days and requires expert hands.
If we suddenly turned it off, the metal would freeze, which is very dangerous. It might even explode. So this is our bargaining chip for staying on the site. That's where I worked.
Christelle Rimbaud worked at SAM for 29 years.
I left school early, when I was 16. I got married at 18, became a mother at 21, and I started working here when I was 18 and a half. Most of us have only ever worked here. We've worked here for a long time. It's complicated after 29 years, 20 years, to face up to all this.
Christelle checked the crankcases. That's the housing for the crankshaft in the engines.
Then I put it in this machine, which inserted little pins in here. And then I slid it onto the rails and I went on to the next step.
Christelle's husband, who worked for another factory in the area, also lost his job 2 years ago. Thanks to his training as a carpenter, he was able to bounce back. But Christelle never took the baccalaureate. She has no qualifications. Conversion will be more difficult.
I I don't even know if I'm capable of doing anything else. I don't know what anyone would ask me to do. I'm lost. The politicians, the bankers, they don't realise the harm they're doing to the likes of us. It's horrible what's happening to us. But for them, we're just numbers, less than nothing. But we are people. We have lives. We have stories. We try to do our best in life. We are little ants. But there are a lot of us. And together, we will make an army of ants. For the moment, we laugh because we haven't left each other yet. But when it's over, the laughter will end.
It's terrible for the region. A factory is always connected to its region.
Anaïs Voigilis, an associate researcher at the University of Poitiers and consultant in a firm that supports companies in transition.
We talk about direct employment in industry, but there are always 2 to 3 other companies that are linked, which puts those jobs on the line. As soon as a factory is closed, especially in regions which are dependent on 1 or 2 factories, that has terrible consequences. We see towns with enormous population changes.
This was the case with the nearby Decazeville coal basin. From 30,000 inhabitants at the end of the 1960s, it's now down to 20,000. And it was the same in the Ardennes in the north of France, which we visited in episode 1. SAM workers want to highlight this phenomenon. David Gistau was born in Decazeville. His grandfather was a miner.
He too suffered the closure of the coal mining industry. Even then, we said, yes, but coal is not the future. And then it's not profitable what you're doing. My father, his son, was a steel worker, and he suffered the same thing in 1987. With the closure of the steel works, we said, steel is not the future. And today, everything is made in China. This is a region that has suffered a lot.
The heartlands of French industry are suffering at the hands of global awareness of climate change and development. It's the decline in car sales that has hit SAM, and that can trace back in part to the pandemic, but more pertinently to climate change and the gradual shift away from combustion engines in a bid to reduce CO2 emissions. In November, Renault said that SAM does not present the necessary conditions of durability and safety. Renault has offered financial support to the employees, but that hasn't soothed the anger.
I don't have the exact number, but like Dacia and so on, they made a big profit.
That's another former SAM worker who doesn't want to share his last name. Thierry says that even though Renault didn't pay dividends in 2021, the company showed a net profit of almost 900 million euros.
They aren't struggling, come on. When you go to a firm which supplies one of France's biggest companies, you think it's impossible for it to go under. Or else it means that Renault is sunk, and we're going with it.
Thierry and his former colleagues insist that SAM was already adapting, pointing out that the company had recently started producing parts for Renault's flagship electric car, the Zoe.
At the start, I said to myself, you know what? We live in a beautiful country. France is one of the most beautiful countries in the world. The state will fix this. They will say, no, you're not allowed to relocate. Stay where you are. No, no, no. They confirmed it wasn't viable, but they didn't find out the facts.
At the time of recording this episode in March 2022, a takeover project is still under study. But like Thierry, many SAM workers prefer not to have any illusions. They see themselves as a national symbol of deindustrialisation.
I'm not in a union. I don't belong to any political party, left, right or centre. I've decided not to vote anymore. I won't vote again because I no longer have confidence in any politician at all. At all.
Thierry is not the only one who no longer votes. According to an Ipsos poll after the 2019 European elections, 60% of workers abstained. And among those who did vote, more than 40% went for Marine Le Pen's far-right Rassemblement National. The question of reindustrialisation is taking up more and more space. The candidates for the 2022 presidential election have all made it a major plank in their manifestos. The current government of Emmanuel Macron claims to have supported nearly 800 relocation or modernisation projects since 2020. Anaïs Voigilis believes the COVID-19 pandemic in particular underlined the importance of industrial sovereignty.
Sovereignty is the ability of one state not to depend on another, to have autonomy in its decision-making. The crisis showed us that we were dependent, that we no longer made a number of priority products at home. So the strategy is to work out what we consider to be fundamental and vital for a nation, particularly in the field of health, food, defence and energy. We have to decide what we absolutely want to control within our own borders, even if it costs more. Because in the event of a major crisis, we need to be self-sufficient.
The annual report of business magazine L'Usine Nouvelle showed that in 2021, the number of new industries actually exceeded closures. But Anaïs Voigilis says it's not enough just to manufacture in France. These goods must also appeal to the French consumer.
That means produce things that cater for the marketplace.
As it is, products made in France, even if they fulfill the idea of sovereignty, are often more expensive than imported products, often because they have to comply with stricter social and environmental standards. 150 kilometres from Decazeville, in the neighbouring department of Lozère, we catch a glimpse of what might lie in store.
The future in France lies with the consumer. Will he or she buy better? That's to say, spend a bit more money for less quantity. I mean, instead of buying 3 cheap shirts, will they buy 1 good one?
That's Jean-Jacques Tuffery, who comes from Florac in the middle of Lozère. He's in the workshop of the family company, which has been making clothes for over 100 years.
We think it was grandfather who invented jeans, yes, based on work clothes.
He heard in Nîmes there was a rather strong fabric.
That second voice is Jean-Jacques' brother Norbert. They reckon their grandfather, Célestin Tuffery, invented jeans at the end of the 19th century.
And that became denim because it was the cloth of the city of Nîmes.
Legend has it that around the same time, a certain Levi Strauss also began to manufacture them in the United States. It's hard to know who really invented jeans. But what is certain is that at the end of the 19th century, the south of France was a heartland of the textile industry. From spinning to tailoring, including weaving and dyeing, the sector was flourishing when Célestin set up his workshop in 1892. The father of Jean-Jacques and Norbert took over the business. The denim-clad 1960s were a high point, but things then began to slide, as Norbert explains.
There were about 40 workers when I learned the trade after leaving school with my 2 brothers. Then in the 80s, it was very complicated because the jeans were made in North Africa, so we shut down the workshop.
The factory doors closed as the textile industry gradually left France, losing 2/3 of its workforce between 1996 and 2015.
With my brothers and my sister, we continued to make trousers, but on a very small scale.
With the siblings hitting retirement age, that could have been the end of the story. But no, enter Jean-Jacques' son, Julien.
My father didn't want me to come back to Lozère. But 15 years ago, he and my uncles were crackpots trying to maintain the savoir-faire, a small production unit that nobody gave a damn about.
We didn't wake up one morning and say, let's go. We thought about it a lot because we were and we still are engineers by training. So we make Excel tables, we make programs, we make schedules. We try to plan so that it makes sense and fits the deadlines.
When they relaunched Atelier Tuffery, the Made in France tag, designed to promote homemade products, was on the rise.
We said to ourselves, we need to do something. It was all there in terms of manufacturing, the know-how, but we had to rethink the designs, because going back to a model that totally fell apart in the 70s and 80s just wasn't feasible. It couldn't work again.
The big advantage of this workshop is that it's new, since we only set it up in 2017. It's a great example of the region getting engaged as it's subsidised this workshop.
To reboot the business, the Tufferys tapped into a range of grants, such as renting the workshop at an affordable rate from the local authority. These little bits of assistance have enabled them to move forward.
So it's a bit calmer now. This is the small warehouse of raw materials.
All around, piles of blue denim. Although the cotton and indigo don't come from France, Tuffery incorporates homegrown wool, hemp and linen into his new designs.
Today, I think you can find denim for less than 50 cents per metre on the other side of the world. Over here, it costs between 8 and 12 euros per metre.
No doubt Atelier Tuffery is thinking long-term in the way it's investing. Its priority is to preserve a know-how inherited from their founder. On top of that, they want to train employees in all aspects of manufacturing and pay attention to their well-being. Key, though, is not to grow too quickly.
Those big 1970s hangars with long lines of sewing machines, one after the other. Good luck to anyone trying that today, because people want something other than a stopwatch and 1,000 task repetitions a day. A lot of making tomorrow's game work well is about making manual labour attractive, liberating and exciting.
The Tuffery sewing machines are working hard. Many of their operators, like 46-year-old Cécile, have been retraining after years elsewhere.
It was my son who suggested it. He was doing a corporate internship here, and he was the one who told me, "You'll love it, you should apply." But as I had no idea how to sew, I said, "No, I don't even know what one of these sewing machines looks like." But he was so insistent that I applied anyway. By some miracle, they said, "Yes, no problem." So that's how I landed up here.
The Tufferys train their new workers themselves, regardless of their original trade.
Before that, I worked for 15 years in a hypermarket, and then as a cleaning lady. And I worked in a rural hostel. So I worked in the summer and 1 week, a month in the winter. My boss there told me, if you find a full-time job here in the mountains, take it. It's still more practical to have a year-round job. And now I have a permanent contract with them, so yes, I'm going to annoy them now until I retire.
The Tuffery objective is to build a solid company over the long term with a happy workforce. The lowest salary is 1,400 euros net per month. That's above the minimum wage. And in 2022, the company will be paying an employee bonus for the first time. It's been made possible by the success of the Made in France mark, a good search engine policy, and a strategy that doesn't involve middlemen.
Thanks to the web, geographical isolation no longer exists. We have an immediate, close relationship with our customers who order, who recommend, who call us, who send emails. We get orders from across France.
In front of us are stacks of orders. Some items are out of stock, victim of their own success and manufacturing delays. But that's a pretty good sign. 5 years after the takeover, Tuffery has gone from less than 100,000 euros in turnover to more than 3 million. The family remains 100% owner of the company and is in the process of buying the workshop from the local authority. These are high-end jeans. To buy Tuffery, you'll need to part with something between 100 and 300 euros. But Julien says that's not as expensive as it sounds.
One day we'll buy our consumer goods at planet cost. I don't know what it'll be called, human cost, planetary cost. Anyway, at planet cost, my jeans, which are too expensive for many today, will be the cheapest in the world, definitely in France.
Julien Tuffery reasons that at some point, goods manufactured far from France will cost French consumers more because their carbon and social footprint will be taken into account. That's what he means by the planet cost, which may be a major argument in favour of French reindustrialisation. On a more global level, Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February has also highlighted the need for industrial sovereignty, as sanctions on Russia and the war had an immediate impact on world trade. Western Europe is facing the prospect of shortages of raw materials produced by Russia, such as oil, gas or aluminium. The price of petrol has already skyrocketed. Conversely, Boeing and Airbus have suspended their deliveries of spare parts for Russian aircraft, and that could create maintenance problems for the Russian national airlines. The importance of self-reliance has been thrown into sharp relief, and events in Ukraine are certain to determine industrial policy in France and across the rest of Europe for decades to come, no matter who is in the Élysée Palace. You've just been listening to Reinventing Industry, the second episode of Crossroads France, a podcast from Agence France Presse, which is also available in French under the title Turbulence. Reinventing Industry was originally created in French by Sarah Lou Lepes. If you enjoyed it, please feel free to share it and tell people about it. In episode 3, we'll be looking at the question of what it takes to be French in an increasingly multicultural country. My name is Barney Spender. À bientôt.